On this edition of Insights on PBS Hawaii, call it genetically engineered, genetically modified, or biotechnology. How is the seed industry thriving in Hawaii, and why has it provoked such a passionate debate? We'll explore the issues at stake with experts in ag, science, and industry. Now, live in our studio, our host, Dan Boylan.
Aloha. Welcome to Insights on PBS Hawaii. I'm Roberta Wong Murray, sitting in for Dan Boylan, who has the night off. When we talk about diversified agriculture in Hawaii, we often think of coffee, macadamia nuts, and tropical flowers. But in recent years, one of the most viable and valuable crops has been seed corn. Despite its economic success, the seed industry has generated controversy due to environmental, cultural, and public health concerns. One of the biggest debates has been over the question of food labeling. Should genetically engineered food carry labels to inform consumers? Are there any health risks? Should these crops take up acreage on Hawaii's diminishing farmland? What about cross-contamination of traditional and organic crops and other environmental impacts? Whether or not you've taken sides in this debate, you probably have questions about the seed industry and the food it produces. So we hope to hear your thoughts and questions tonight. You can join our conversation by calling, emailing, or tweeting your questions and comments. The contact information you now see on your screen will be repeated throughout the program. Insights is available live on your television and computer screen at pbshawaii.org. As always, the video will also be posted online after tonight's program. Now, let's welcome our guests. Mark Phillipson is president of the Hawaii Crop Improvement Association, the nonprofit trade group for Hawaii's seed industry. He is also the government and industry relations manager for Syngenta Hawaii, one of the association's member companies with operations on Oahu and Kauai. Mark Fergusson is Chief Executive Officer and CFO of Down to Earth Natural Food Stores. He is also a Director and Vice President of the Hawaii Organic Farmers Association and serves on the advisory board of the Vegetarian Society of Hawaii. Mark is a founding member of Label It Hawaii, which advocates for GMO labeling. Richard Manshardt is a professor in the Horticulture Department of the University of Hawaii's College of Tropical Agriculture and Human Resources, or CTAR, where he teaches tropical fruit production and plant genetics. Dr. Manshardt was on the research team that developed the rainbow papaya in the 1990s, which is genetically engineered to resist disease. Hector Valenzuela is also a professor at CTAR. Dr. Valenzuela is a crop extension specialist who works with vegetable farmers around the state. Through his work, he supports small, organic, and family farmers and advocates sustainable agriculture practices. His perspective differs from Dr. Manshardt's on this issue. Welcome, gentlemen, this evening.
Glad to be here.
Now, there are a lot of acronyms tossed around with this topic, so let's start with please give us a quick vocabulary lesson. And if you wouldn't mind going around the table, do GMO and GE and biotech all refer to essentially the same thing? Can we start with you, Mark?
Sure, yes. Biotech, ag biotech is referred to as GMO and biotechnology, but they're synonymous. It's kind of gone the way of Kleenex and tissue. They basically mean the same thing.
They're interchangeable?
Yes.
Richard, do you agree with that?
Yes, the term biotechnology is a little broader. It includes virtually everything that people have learned about biology in the last 150 years and have led to the development of lots of new, very powerful tools for learning about life.
Sort of an umbrella over then.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah.
How about you, Mark? Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, they're basically the same, genetically modified organisms, or
Okay.
biotech, I guess, is a bit broader, applies to more than just plants and crops, right? It takes in animals and so on.
Okay. Pretty much the same?
Yes, I agree. It's genetic engineering, or biotechnology, which consists of introducing a gene from one species to another species. But one point to make is that you're creating an organism that has never before existed in nature. So that's a unique trait of biotechnology.
So from a public perspective, when you are creating something that has never existed before, I think the question of is it safe arises. Could you give us your perspective on, are genetically modified foods safe?
Definitely, yes. The product itself, for example, corn, is not changed. The nutrient value is the same. All the contents basically are the same. What we do is add a gene that doesn't interfere with the toxins or the allergens. Those things are tested for. For example, when a seed is developed, it takes us 7 to 10 years to develop a trait into a seed through genetics, through the biotech genetics. And in that process, we are constantly monitoring, taking notes, working with regulatory agencies, the FDA, the EPA, the USDA. And then at the end of that, if the product is to move forward, a packet of information is delivered to those agencies for their, for their review. And that process averages somewhere around a 2-year time period, where they interact with the companies that have presented this product, this new novel product that Hector is referring to, and they either approve or disapprove of that product at that time.
What is the purpose behind developing genetically modified foods? Richard, I think you have an example about that.
The purpose is a new way of making an old improvement in crops. Humans and crops have developed together over the last 10,000 years. There aren't any store variety tomatoes growing out in nature. These are all genetically modified organisms. Anything that you find in a grocery store in the way of fresh produce has a long history of modification with humans. But what genetic engineering offers is another way of producing special kinds of improvements where there's not enough genetic diversity in a crop. For instance, with the papaya that has had big problems with a virus disease, even though the diversity of papaya was looked at for resistance to that disease, there wasn't anything available. So in that case, importing a gene from another organism, in this case the virus, is actually the only way we could develop protection against that virus disease. So traditional breeding methodologies have always relied on making cross-pollinations in plants for crop improvement. And it's the way that people have produced new varieties for thousands of years. And that's been very successful. But there are limitations, as I just mentioned, and the ability to, in some cases, to move a single gene precisely into an already good variety and improve it by one characteristic is very useful for improvement purposes.
Mark, you wanted to answer that?
I was going to respond to something that Mark was saying. You know, the reason for the biotech crops, I mean, it can't be said they're safe. They're putting in Bt pesticide into the crop. There's two major reasons why their seed crop is being developed. One is to put the pesticide directly in the crop. And this pesticide, when the insects eat it, it bursts open their abdomens. It kills them by bursting their abdomens. So to say that's safe in humans without proper human studies or proper analysis it's just not correct. And secondly, the second major reason that biotech seed corn is grown here in Hawaii is so that the corn is resistant to Roundup. So in other words, that you can spray poison on it and not kill it. So this has resulted in a very large and significant increase in the amount of Roundup being sprayed on crops in the United States. And so for both of these reasons, this technology is actually quite a dangerous technology, it's inadequately tested, and it's moving completely in the wrong direction. I mean, agriculture should be moving towards sustainable and organic, not towards use of more pesticides or putting insecticides in crops.
So going back to the safety of our consumption of these foods then that have been genetically modified or engineered, how do we know, because it takes
We don't know.
generations for problems to occur and arise, how do we know what the effects of all this will be?
There is no testing, there is no labeling. If somebody suffers, like there is, since the release of the GMO crops into the food supply, and 80% of foods of processed foods in the United States are genetically modified. Since they've been released, there's been a significant increase in the amount of allergies. There's a significant increase in the amount of heart disease, cancer, reproductive problems. And there is no testing because there is no labeling and nowhere to call in to say, oh, I've eaten GMO foods and I have these results. And see, they're expecting GMO foods like, well, if you eat it and you get sick immediately, that's what they're talking about. They're not talking about long-term trends. There is no studies documenting that. There is no requirement for government labeling. And the studies to get these products approved that Mark was referring to, these studies are all done by the GMO companies who have a vested self-interest in presenting only studies and only information that shows that the products are so-called safe. Any test results done independently, or the USDA and the FDA, they don't conduct any tests.
How would you like to respond to that, Mark?
Well, there's several parts that Mark brought up. First of all, the gene that he's talking about, the pesticide, is called Bt, and Bt is naturally occurring bacteria. It happens to be the number1 pesticide that an organic farmer would use on his crop to alleviate pests. It is in a millionth, the dose is minimal, and it only affects certain bugs, i.e. worms. It doesn't affect human beings. Our guts don't have the same flora and fauna, let's say, in our stomachs that Bt would affect it. So it's not something that is viable. And the cancer thing kind of upsets me when they mention that we can cause cancer. There's absolutely no proof of that, Mark. In fact, this upset me so much that please let me finish. Let me finish. These foods are absorbed in the stomach, correct? That's where we absorb our food. If you go back to the NCI, National Cancer Institute, they have been taking trends for the since 1970. If you look from 1990 to 2010, the trend is for less stomach cancers. The trend is going down. It's a very rare disease as far as cancers go anyway. But I mean, some of these things are just, I guess, fearful. There's nothing scientific, evidence-based to back it up. But, to put it out there, I think it just scares the public, and that's where we're at.
Are you opposed then to labeling?
Here's the thing with labeling, and from my viewpoint, is that we are 16 years into having genetically engineered foods on our tables here in the United States. Other countries have labeled. The FDA says that the foods that we eat should be safe and nutritionally equivalent to, no matter what it comes from, organic, conventional, or biotech. Our biotech foods they meet those standards. And again, we have not had one single incident, no documents of any illness or death. And I can't say that for the organic industry, and I don't know. Is that true?
Well, if I could just step in for a moment too, I'd like to back up the fact that there's been plenty of research on the effectiveness of Bt, how it operates, why it's toxic for certain kinds of insects and not toxic for mammalian systems. So the fact that it's expressed in the plant, and only the insects that actually eat the plant are affected, actually makes it a better insecticide, because you're not killing off the protective insects that will also control insects in the field that are not directly on the crop. So you can institute different kinds of integrated pest management systems that way. Makes a much more effective control of certain kinds of insects.
Hector, what do you want to say about that?
With respect to safety, I would have to agree with Mark that it's a big question mark. And one of the big problems is that as part of the regulatory process, the government is allowing the industry to police itself. So you develop a conflict of interest in terms of the quality of the research, the independence of the research. And just to give you one example, when industry conducts safety studies, say for BT, they use the BT product produced by a bacteria. They don't use the actual BT product produced by the plant to conduct their safety study on animals. When they do studies on the effect of Roundup, they use only the active ingredient of Roundup. They haven't used the entire product that is applied to plants. So it's like you're looking in the wrong place for safety. So basically, there has been very few independent research to evaluate what is the long-term effect of these products on humans.
So you actually are in agreement with Mark Fergusson when you say there is a big question mark about safety. Earlier this evening, you were telling me, Hector, that you work with farmers throughout the state. Tell me about what you do with our small farmers. And
basically, I work with commercial growers growing crops,
okay.
Food crops like tomatoes and cabbages and so on. So this is kind of a different realm. When it affects them, it comes in terms of using available agricultural land. We're trying to get our farmers to expand into new lands, but part of the concern is that our policymakers are planning the use of land for the use of biofuels or genetically modified crops. So this is leaving out a lot of the growers that want to produce crops, food for food, to sustain ourselves. And our paradigm in terms of what is the best agriculture for the state, I think has shifted, whether we should be working for sustainability or merely based on industrial style of production.
when you say sustainability, you are talking about using natural resources and natural forms to combat, for example, disease and...
Right. Organic farming practices. But I think what Hector's also referring to is that a big goal for Hawaii is food sustainability. Now, the prime land in Hawaii for farming is being used to grow seed crop that's exported to the mainland. So there's no, and it's not even sold, there's no revenues coming into Hawaii from it. So it's not benefiting Hawaii, it's not growing food for Hawaii, it's resulting in increased pesticides and herbicides being sprayed in Hawaii. There's dust contamination, there's water contamination, there's BT getting into the soil. So there's really no benefit to Hawaii in this seed crop. And in fact, it's actually harmful because it's preventing Hawaii from reaching its goals of self-sustainability. Like 85% of food is currently imported into the state of Hawaii. And the state has a goal of making it so that we're less dependent on imports, because if there's a strike or there's a tsunami or natural disaster or whatever, within a few weeks or a month, Hawaii's out of food. So we should be using this valuable land to grow food for people to eat. You can't eat this seed crop.
What percentage of our farmland is devoted to growing seed?
Thank you. The percent is less than 5%. The seed companies, seed farmers use about 25,000 acres under ownership or lease. Only about 7,000 of that is in production at any given time. And actually the reason that the seed farmers are here doing their research is because there's no winter. They can plant 3 crops a year. That is the primary reason that we're here. The other thing is the pesticide use. We don't use any more pesticides than a corn farmer does in Nebraska or Iowa. Each company has what we call in agriculture an integrated pest management program. An integrated pest management program is an agronomist and a staff that go out and they scout the fields every day. They look for bugs, they look for good bugs, bad bugs, they identify them. We do it through test strips, much like your fly strips at home. They gather, the bugs, whoever comes by and sticks to them, and Hector probably knows about these practices better than anybody at this table. And then there's also fungus and diseases. And once we identify those things, we, go ahead and apply the correct product in the correct dose. All of our applicators are licensed applicators by the state of Hawaii. All pesticides used in the state is regulated by the State Department of Agriculture. We have agriculture inspectors, and thank goodness to this administration, they have actually added more agricultural inspectors to take care of invasive species and make sure that the food we eat is safe.
I'm going to combine a comment and question now for all of you. Traditional Hawaiian intercropping systems such as bananas, taro, and turmeric are more productive and pest resistant than any monocrop. Do the panelists believe that farmers should have the right to choose their agricultural methodology, organic, conventional, biotech? We'll start with you.
Well, I guess farmers should have the choice. What we're really talking about is labeling. If you're growing genetically modified food, it should be labeled so that consumers have the choice. You know, a lot of consumers are very concerned about this genetic modification issue. They want the ability to know when they're buying genetically modified foods. And the way it's currently structured, the cost, see, like when you grow genetically modified foods, there's a cost, because other companies, they want to sell food that isn't genetically modified, and consumers want to know, so they're having to test, because there's cross-pollination, contamination and handling and so on. And so companies in our industry, the natural products industry and the organic industry, are having to test their products, to pay money to test and to set up proper processes and so on to ensure that their products aren't contaminated by GMO. And so this is a cost that the GMO industry is passing through to other farmers and ultimately to consumers. And so the right to know what's in your food is a very important right. And it's actually like if the GMO industry believes that their products are so good and good for people and good for the world, then why aren't they proudly labeling them?
It was interesting, in California, Proposition 13 was on the ballot. 37, going back to the tax thing, about requiring labeling in foods. And despite the 47% that voted for it, the proposition failed. Do you feel that there is enough of concern locally in this state that we would have that kind of possible legislation?
I just want to touch upon the comment. I agree with the comment of Mark Phillipson, which the GMO industry in the state is dependent on the high use of pesticides. So when we talk about risks and potential health effects, we should consider both the GM products as well as the pesticides that are being used. So for instance, we're talking about products like atrazine, which have been banned throughout the European Union, but are still used in the United States, Lorsban and Roundup. And there's been more and more reports from the research literature showing that there's increased health risks from exposure to communities from these pesticides. So in terms of policy and where are we going in Hawaiian agriculture, are we going in the direction of more industrial agriculture, or like the caller mentioned, should we be thinking of alternative methods of agriculture based on what our ancestors did in Hawaii, based on traditional agriculture, with methods of ag that rely just on local resources and indigenous knowledge to maintain productivity and self-sufficiency, as Mark indicated?
Richard, Harold from Oahu wants to know, how many varieties of bananas are there worldwide? Are the local bananas GMO or imported bananas GMO? Can you help us out with that?
Yeah, local Hawaiian bananas, which came in with the Polynesians, are, of course, they've been here for hundreds of years, but everything else that's grown in Hawaii came in after Captain Cook came by. In the world, there are probably 400 or 500, at least, different clones of banana, and none of those are genetically engineered. Nothing commercial is genetically engineered in banana in Hawaii. I think something that people should understand is that there's no silver bullet in GMO kinds of crops. There's no silver bullet in organic crops. Different growers encounter different problems, different scales of agriculture. So really Hawaii needs to try to become more sustainable. I think most of us agree with that. But there's no one way that's going to do that. And I think what we need is to work together, which means cooperation not just between researchers, but between growers. Know who your neighbor is, know what he's doing, and have some respect for that. But it's possible to do production by many different means and come up with good results.
I'd like to add on that too, if I could. We need everything in the toolbox. We need biotech, we need organic, we need conventional, we need people to do backyard gardens, we need community gardens. We need the whole gamut to feed us and feed the world. There's 1 billion people right now today that are starving. We've got, a couple more billion coming along in the next couple decades here. We have to figure this out. We have to coexist. We have to make this work. It's the only humane way. The Bill Gates Foundation, Bill Gates said, the foundation says every human has the right to its full potential. A starving human being does not have that right. And so
biotech is not, there is no increased crop yields from biotech.
That's incorrect, Mark.
No, it is correct. There's studies showing it, that there's been no increase in crop yields overall by biotech crops at all.
Could I pop in on that one?
Yeah, go
just
ahead.
a moment?
I think also...
When it comes to yield, there are many ways that yield is increased, and one of them is by protecting the crop from predators and from weeds. And that's a very important aspect of this.
One of the key problems with the GMO industry is that they have been unable to contain their products, either with the crops that they're growing or with the chemicals that they're using. So for example, atrazine, which I mentioned earlier, today it's present in most of our aquifers and water wells in the United States. And with respect to GMO crops, again, they have been unable to keep it within their farms. And for example, the papaya, GMO papaya now has contaminated non-GMO or conventional areas. So they talk about the concept of coexistence, but coexistence may be impossible if they are unable to contain their product within their farms and within their sites. Because some people, for philosophical, religious, or any reason, do not want any GMO ingredients on their food. So they think of it as a trespassing on their privacy when they are invaded with foreign products.
But don't you have that through organic?
If I can also get in on that one. I think the UH has recently done some studies with papaya and in how the gene is moving around. It's really quite simple, and it's no different from any other kind of situation where a farmer needs to isolate a crop from pollen sources that it doesn't want to be used as cross-pollinators. So this same kind of technology of isolating a crop simply by not allowing pollen in can be done really easily with papayas. And it's not different from you would have in seed production facilities.
So what's the level of contamination that you found on feral populations of papaya in Oahu?
The amount that we actually found was about 6% on the Big Island, about 20% on this island.
Of contamination?
That's in feral papayas outside of commercial fields.
So that's a huge...
And what the rules that we have already put out on the web for organic growers is if they want to protect their crops, first thing they have to do is know that they don't have transgenic seed or genetically engineered seed. And many growers don't know that and have planted accidentally the wrong kind of seed. If they eliminate the female papayas in their field, which is standard commercial procedure for papaya production, there's very small chance, less than 5% chance of outcrossing on those plants in the field. And if you're able to eliminate any male plants or any females around the field, then you're going to have very, very low incidence of outcrossing.
But if you have contaminated over 20% of the papayas in the roadsides, that to me seems like an extremely high level of contamination of our environment.
You know, Hector, that's not coming out by pollen, it's coming out by seed. And people eat those papayas, and most of the ways that the seed moves is by people.
So Barbara from Honolulu wants to know what variety of papaya in the local markets is not genetically modified.
Well, maybe I can tell it, well, okay, not genetically modified would be Sunrise, Sunset, Kapoho, the X77 variety that's grown on the Kahuku area. The ones that are genetically engineered would be Rainbow, Sun Up, Laie Gold, primarily.
This is from Sean, how will GMO farms protect non-GMO crops from contamination? And what compensation are they willing to make if contamination occurs?
This was just being addressed by our Secretary of Agriculture, Tom Vilsack. He assembled a group called the AC21. They came out with some recommendations. I'm sorry, I'm not familiar exactly what those recommendations were, but this was one, I know, specific topic that is being addressed on a federal level. But I can tell you, we farm next to a sweet corn grower on the island here in Oahu. Corn pollinates for roughly 2 weeks, give or take a few days. So when they are going to plant their corn, we're good neighbors. We call each other and say, I'm planting on January 1. I'm putting a crop in. Great. We'll put ours in on February 1, or put a break and period in there. So we have not had any issue of cross-contamination or cross-pollination. And there is no native corn in Hawaii as well.
David from Hawaii Kai wants to know, what tests are the organic companies doing to ensure that BT, bacteria on produce, is not being put in their stores?
So I just wanted to add that wherever GM crops have been grown in the world, the fields have been contaminated of conventional farms. In Japan, there's no commercial production of rape, but if you go to in the wild they have identified genetically modified rape varieties because they imported rape seed from Canada. In the mainland United States, wild populations of rape have also been found. So the industry really has been unable to contain the production. Just like if you're growing cows in your farm, you're not supposed to have your cows feeding on your neighbor's farm. So they have been unable to keep trespassing, both with pollen and with the chemicals that they're using to grow, that are necessary to grow these crops, such as Roundup, atrazine, and other pesticides.
Hector, you keep saying that, but let's be perfectly clear. Pesticides have been around for a number of years prior to biotech. Conventional farmers use them, organic farmers use them. You can't produce on a commercial basis without them. Is that correct?
Not really.
Oh, really?
So we have to remember that the 5 companies that are growing GMO seed in Hawaii are chemical companies. So the traits that they have introduced to date over the past 17 years are pesticide-based traits. Both of them include the use of pesticides. And what we have learned over the past 60 years is that we cannot contain the use of pesticides. So we have to develop production techniques that keep us away from the use of pesticides, and that's called integrated pest management.
You had said that we are 16 years into genetically modified.
Correct.
What was the first crop? Is it corn? Was it corn seed?
Actually, I believe the first crop doesn't exist anymore. Was something called the flavor saver tomato. And correct me if I'm wrong on that, gentlemen. Anybody here that knows more about it than I do, but It was a tomato that was genetically engineered to have a longer shelf life of ripeness, so you could pick it rather than picking it when it was pre-ripe, let's say, and let it age on the truck and through the distribution channel, and then when it gets to the store, it's ripe. They could pick it closer to where it was ripe. I think the failure of that was it was a terrible tasting tomato, I think, and so it didn't make it.
I think that's the bottom line. The GMO industry is producing crops that make it so they can sell more Roundup. And they're making it so they license the crop, you've got to buy it from them. So who's benefiting? The GMO companies. How do you or I or anyone benefit as a consumer by having a product that is resistant to Roundup being sprayed on it? So this is not about something that's good for people or helping people. It's purely creating profits for companies. It's resulting in more herbicide use, more insecticide use. It's resulting in contamination. It's harming businesses. It's harming organic businesses. It's harming the export markets for the United States growers of corn. And there's so much
technology is being used in many ways besides herbicide and insecticides.
But those are the two main commercial uses.
Well,
I'm sure you'd
and the
agree.
growers are not the only ones who benefit, or the seed sellers. The U.S.
Who else benefits?
Well, we do, because
How do we benefit?
production costs are an important part of the cost of food.
Production costs are no cheaper due to GMO. They're more expensive due to GMO.
That's not true.
The costs of the
I think
seed
that's
going
quite
up.
well demonstrated, that these are efficiencies that accrue not just
I'm
to the
sure
grower
Dr.
and
Hector
the seed
can
producer,
confirm
but to
there's
the
tests
public.
showing that, or results, studies showing that costs are increasing because the GMO companies keep raising the cost of the seed.
But the seed is only a fraction of the cost of production. And being able to control pests and weeds in the field is really an important part of
now
lowering costs.
as a result
production.
of all the use of these kind
Well,
of
let me
technologies,
just bring
now
the
there's super
example
weeds
of the
growing
papaya,
up.
if I can again. If it weren't for papaya, then we'd have to, if it weren't for the transgenic control of the disease, we'd have to be importing papayas. So that technology keeps the price quite suitable for people.
That can't be
Let me
said.
interject here with a question from Aaron. So if you claim that GM food is not safe, why do organizations, including the USDA and American Medical Association, report that they are?
Because there's other organizations like the Academy of Environmental Medicine. There's just recently Kaiser Permanente. Kaiser Permanente is advising their patients to not eat GMO food because of the risks of allergies and the unknown factors that can come about. The Academy of Environmental Medicine is strongly advising people not to eat GMO food.
Mark, Kaiser Permanente, the largest HMO, said not to eat GMO food.
Yes. It just happened.
Really?
It just happened last week.
That's quite remarkable, because it's my understanding that it was one nutritionist in a newsletter out at somewhere in the Pacific Northwest said that. It got picked up by, this is one of those internet things, and this is where, a little fact or, with no science or anything behind it runs rampant and goes crazy. I guarantee you, please contact Kaiser tomorrow and verify that, because that is simply not true.
Someone wants to know, have any Hawaii GMO companies or researchers introduced mainland pathogens for research?
Mainland pathogens. Not that I'm aware of. I don't know what that's about.
Yeah. I just wanted to mention with respect to that question that one of the statements made often by industry is that so far there's been 3 trillion servings or so on, and that nobody has been harmed from eating genetically modified crops. And I think the government makes similar kind of statements. And I feel it's a very irresponsible statement, because I haven't seen one single study from the refereed literature that has looked at the impact of health on the community. And one of the main reasons is because the GMOs are not labeled. So we haven't conducted any post-marketing studies to actually follow up on the community to find out if anybody in Hawaii has gotten sick from eating genetically modified papaya.
So Joan says consumer access to complete information is a cornerstone of the American free market. What free market values are served by withholding GMO information from the public?
I don't think it's a matter of withholding the information. The issue is who decides what gets labeled. And in our country, the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, has the mandate to regulate labeling if there is a bona fide health issue. And in the case of genetically modified or genetically engineered foods, there is no demonstrable health threat. So if labeling is to occur, it's not the FDA's mandate, and labeling isn't a popular issue. It has to have some health threat basis. So it seems to me that labeling for the issue of genetically engineered foods should be a voluntary thing, unless there is a health threat, in which case it becomes the FDA's responsibility to label. But at this point, voluntary labeling for products that should be labeled as non-GMO would really be the reasonable way to go.
So I think, again, that's just a transference of costs. It's moving, like there's an industry that's making massive profits out of making GMO crops. They're pushing that cost onto other industries and businesses to have to test and make sure, firstly, that their food is not contaminated, and then secondly, they have to do the testing and get the certifications, change their labeling. But the interesting point is that there is labeling through the non-GMO project, and non-GMO project verified products are the fastest, have the most sales growth. They're currently enjoying about 25% sales growth, which is showing how much consumers actually do care about labeling of GMO, and they do want it. And products that are getting this labeling are selling very quickly. And it's a growing trend within the natural products industry. There's 6,000 products that have currently been verified by the non-GMO project.
So the non-GMO project is supported by what entities?
Well, it's a non-independent, non-profit organization. That it was started by dedicated people, similar, with similar belief systems to myself, who are very passionate about organic food and seeing the threat of GMO foods. Which it happened, you're asking about what was done first. We talked about the flavor tomato. 80 to 90% of corn and soy in the United States is GMO. And it's 80% of processed foods in the United States are GMO. And people, when they find out this, firstly, they're just completely surprised. And then if you ask them, as different independent surveys have done, do you want labeling? 90% of people say, yes, I do. And, but anyway, we're being forced to incur the massive cost of having to independently test and so on and so forth. But people do want to buy non-GMO food.
So the question from a viewer is, what do you say to people who can't afford to buy organic food? Food labeled organic contains no GMO ingredients. Since the organic label tells us whether food is GMO or not, why hike up prices with mandatory GMO labels?
That was an argument of the industry that, labeling will increase the cost of food. Really, it won't. It's just it'll be a minimal cost increase, but it actually isn't really that. It's like, why aren't they labeling it? If you're putting GMO in food, and despite their assurances that it's safe and it's tested and so on, which just is not correct, there is inadequate testing. The testing is done by the companies themselves. There is no labeling. So how do we know people aren't getting sick over the long term? I'm not just talking about, I ate breakfast this morning and I didn't get sick. We're talking about over the long term, over generations. Because once this technology is released into the wild, as it has been, it can't be called back in.
I think the labeling issue, the costs of labeling, the actual piece of paper is pretty minuscule for either organic or for GMO. But separating the food streams from the field to the consumer is really quite.
We're just talking papayas. That's quite simple.
Significant.
Hawaiian papayas are simple. Stick a label on it. It's GMO. But processed foods that contain 50 or more ingredients that have corn or soy in them, that have gone through multiple hands and through different factories, to trace that and to ensure that it's GMO free is a very complex and expensive proposition, and it's something that the GMO industry is forcing on to food manufacturers.
But it's really
Let's have
Yeah.
a response from Mark.
I can't help but feel that, and I'm not being defensive here, but I feel that the organic industry, or what you're telling me, Mark, you're trying to stigmatize the biotech industry. You're trying to say that ag biotech is not safe, that the foods aren't safe, that people, some multi-generations down the road, are going to get sick or something.
What I'm saying is there is a test to show that it's safe. You're saying it's safe. I'm saying, hey, the jury's out.
I'm telling you that
there
we've been
is
eating
no
it for
answers
16
yet.
years, and
it's
I
not
don't
labeled.
know. I don't know of any
And it's
clinical
not
trial.
labeled.
Mark, name me a clinical
people
trial
don't
that's
know.
gone on longer than 16 years. I mean, this is, there is no trial, first of all. But I mean, we have
There's a
16
big
years of daily
increase-
use of
there's
people
a
eating
big
it over and
increase
over and
in
over again.
allergies, right? A big increase in allergies, a big increase in fertility issues, a lot of sterility.
But
And
correlation like that
right.
doesn't mean that that's caused by.
But we don't know that it isn't.
Let's
because
throw
where's
cancer
the
and
testing?
autism in there
Well,
too,
Where's the
I mean,
test- where's
put
the
it all on
testing to
us.
show that it isn't?
Jerry from Manoa wants to know, if GMOs are so safe, why is there such industry resistance then to labeling? The public has the right to know.
It's not the industry's call on labeling, it's the FDA's
But why
call
is
on
the
labeling.
industry spending millions of dollars
So
to lobby and prevent labeling?
And Hannah wants to know, what recourse does the public have if this does turn out to be harmful?
So one of the issues with genetically modified crops is not that they are regulated, but rather that they have been deregulated. And originally they were deregulated, but claiming that they were substantially equivalent to the non-GMO crops. The problem is that substantially equivalent is not a scientific definition. It was almost pulled out of the hat just by picking a few random measurements to compare the varieties. But today, substantially equivalent has been discredited as a method of comparison and is considered just a starting point. So consumers have the right, as a democratic process, to demand we want labeling. And in the United States, over 90% of the people support labeling. In Hawaii, I believe it's over 70%. About 60 countries in the world require labeling on genetically modified crops. So cities in the US are saying, we also would like to have a choice when I go to the store and purchase a product. And if the federal government is unwilling to do it, we can do it locally through the concept of home rule.
I have 3 comments from 3 different viewers and then a couple of questions. Mike from IAEA, what happens when viruses replicate through GMO? We will have no defense against them. They will attack crops and people. John from Hilo says, today's national news indicates that obesity is a larger world problem than hunger. GMO labeling, at the least, is the most ethical process for addressing the social implications of our actions. And then a guest asks, what happened to just letting nature take its course? What happened to natural selection and survival of the fittest? This is a question for you from Angela, Mark, or the panelists. Do the chemicals and practices of the big biotech 5 here in Hawaii have a connection to bee colony collapse disorder?
No. The varomite virus, there has been no correlation. I can only tell you that after slips and falls on our farms, the number 2 incident for safety is bee and wasp stings. So,
I think it's been pretty well shown that GMOs are not involved in that. Pollen collection isn't an issue. As Mark mentioned, there is a mite issue, a parasitizing mite on bees, and there's also a viral component to that. It's not a simple issue, but those are the two major things.
I don't think it's fully understood at this point, but you know, I can only tell you what I know.
One of the problems with the reliance on the use of pesticides with GMO production is that these pesticides eventually stop working. So the original products, the original BT products and the Roundup materials that were used originally are not working as efficiently anymore. So new pesticides are being developed. And one of the new pesticides that are being used are seed treatments of what are called imidacloprid. And several studies from Europe and even in the United States have shown that these pesticides, the seed treatments, indeed impact bee populations. And they don't outright kill the bees, but they change their behavior. So they are very subtle effects in terms of behavior. And while colony bee collapse cannot be solely attributed to that cause, it could be a contributing factor. And with respect to health, this is one of the concerns, that people might not just drop dead from eating a GMO crop, but it might cause a subtle effect on your health, a chronic effect that you may turn down 5, 10, or 15 years down the road.
Jake says, I have heard that non-GMO crops can be contaminated by neighboring GMO pollen, and as a result, the farmer with the now contaminated crop cannot use the resulting seeds to plant because he doesn't have permission to use the non-GMO seeds. Is that right?
Well,
doesn't have the permission to
use the now GMO seeds.
What we
I think it has to do with the organic issue again.
What we observe in Canada, for example, is that there's trucks full of grain growing from the farm to the silo, and if some of those grains, by perchance, happen to fall into a neighbor's farm, if that farm is growing that GMO field, the seed company can come and claim that you are growing a GMO crop and sue you for using their variety, from breaking their patents. And this is what happened in Canada with Pershing Miser.
I think that one of the issues here is that the organic rules, as they're set up now, allow for contamination of an organically produced crop. If the grower's done everything he can do to produce a crop organically, if it's beyond his control and some of the pollen comes in from outside, he's still able to market that crop as organic. So that doesn't prevent the organic growers from marketing it as organic.
Sued by the company for growing genetically modified crops on your farm if you were not authorized.
Very seriously doubt that would ever happen in Hawaii.
Well, it has happened on the mainland, it has happened in Canada for intellectual property infringement.
Yeah, and those instances you're thinking of with rapeseed are highly, they've been adjudicated in the court, and the court found them to be guilty.
Gentlemen, we have rapidly come to a near close of this session here. So for 20 seconds, I want to go around the table, and I guess we want to ask for some final thoughts about labeling, non-labeling, and why or why not. Mark?
Well, I'm going to change it a little bit because I read an article in Scientific America last month that, and I'll summarize it this way, it says that if we change society to where the assertions of ideology overtake systematic knowledge gained by scientific studies, where are we? I mean, public discourse is reduced to these endless warring opinions, and then those with the loudest voice win? I mean, is that where we're going?
Richard?
Well, Mark took the words out of my mouth. I feel the same way, that if science doesn't have a place at the table with policy formulations like the economics and political inputs, then in the long term, society is going to be in bad shape.
Less than 1 minute, Mark.
Well, it's interesting what they're saying, because science is dictating the agenda. There is GMO crops everywhere, and people are just merely asking, could we please have them labeled? And we're being told, oh no, you're not allowed to.
Hector?
I feel there's a lot of question marks about the safety of GMOs with respect to the environment and health, and a lot of the claims that have been made by proponents have been, I found, that have been to be exaggerated or to have been false.
Thank you, gentlemen, for this evening. Sure. Join us next week as we look back at the year 2012. Our annual year in review will recall the political, economic, educational issues and events that made the headlines this year. Join our panel that includes journalists, an economist, and the head of one of the largest charitable organizations in Hawaii. We'll explore recent priorities and new opportunities that 2013 may bring. That's next time on Insights on PBS Hawaii. I'm Roberta Wong Murray. Good evening.